Hello and welcome to Health and Wellness, your guide to the integrated personal and financial retirement journey for physicians. I'm your host, Michael Swartz, Certified Financial Planner and Master Certified Physician Development Coach. Welcome back to the Health and Wellness Podcast. This is part 2 with Daren Tobert, Mr. Daren Tobert, not doctor anymore, retired back in September of 2024. And with that, Daren, welcome back to the podcast.
Great to be back, Michael. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. So in this conversation, we'll do a quick reflection. We talked a bit about your career arc, the relationship that you had with your career and how it wasn't particularly integrated. But in this conversation, we can talk more about some of the roles that you had outside of your career. And specifically, you mentioned, the investment and financial piece of it. And then would love to talk a bit more just about what you're doing in retirement as well, so that you had something to retire to. So with that, let's talk a bit about the financial piece and what you see as vitally important for physicians as they're preparing for retirement, and with perspective from the other side, what is retirement like financially?
Sure. Yeah. So I guess from a financial standpoint, I really became interested in that back in 1990 when I was a first year resident in internal medicine, starting to get a real paycheck, with FICA taxes removed and stuff like that. And just looking at, okay, that's not as much take home pay as I thought I was going to get, right? So that kind of hits everybody when they're young in life. And really just started getting interested in, okay, what should we be doing with our money? How do we look at it? And so delved into personal finance in a fairly big way back then, alongside my other studies, of course. But really just became interested along the way, just continuous reading and, recreational reading, investment and the whole thing. Back then, we would buy actively managed mutual funds in a brokerage account, which usually even came with commissions to trade them of, $25, $30 or a percentage of your investment. And so, nowadays things have gotten so much better in the investing world. But just through that reading and discovery process, just became really fascinated with the whole idea of investing and the whole concept of exponential growth. You mentioned it in our previous session, where humans just don't really have a good grid for exponents and what that means to the way numbers progress over time. So I just became fascinated by that. And then, one aspect of that I hadn't really grasped was the whole idea of just early retirement. And through a financial blog called Mr. Money Mustache, silly blog name, but he wrote a post, it was probably 15 years ago, that just grabbed me, um, you know, by the scruff of the neck and said, hey, here it is. If you live off half your income and save half, you can be done in 15 years. If you live off 25% of your income and save 75%, then you can be done in 10 years. And these things just kind of, and he just shows very simple math for why that's true. Um, and part of that whole message is frugality and getting excellent money from or excellent value from the money that you do spend, right? And really focusing on spending on things that will truly make you happy, not just spending to keep up with the Joneses and so on. And part of that is just learning how to invest your money properly so that you can take advantage of exponents, right? Because a 1% difference in overall return over a period of 50 years results in enormous changes in the final balance of the portfolio. So learning those things along the way were just life changing for me, and they just would every time refocus my planning and so on. And
Well, you
then too,
mentioned,
just the
oh, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, you mentioned the investment piece. And I think what I kind of heard between the lines there was investment, both of take home pay and that 25 or 50% of income that you're spending. You really don't have to look at those as expenses, but investments in experiences. And if we don't have a high return of value on those, if we're not buying new clothes for the sake of turning over our closet as opposed to buying new clothes because we need them,
Right.
you start to see your expenses as investments as well. And if they're adding to the value of your life, by all means, spend that money. And then as
Mhm.
soon as there's not, there is that law of diminishing returns where ultimately we're spending money and it's not adding significant value to our lives. What if we just truncate that, maybe use the 80-20 rule and say, hey, 20% of my spending is giving me 80% of the value that you you can really take advantage of additional savings and really not lose much on the quality of life. And then you do the financial investing with those funds, and your
Mhm.
life can take on this whole new dynamic.
Absolutely. Yeah, very true. And, over time, of course, we're married and we're raising kids, and they have to, get to the same understanding at some point, and there's going to be conflict at times. There's going to be differences in values of what I think you need and what you're spending at the store, kind of thing. And so that all helps build relationships and deepen relationships over time too. So you're investing in your family, and you're investing in your legacy when you're teaching your kids about money and finance too. So that's been an important focus for me along the way and into retirement, is just working with my girls to get them set up on a very healthy track, hopefully, before I'm not there to help them anymore. So that's all been fun too.
Absolutely. And on that topic too, if you wouldn't mind sharing your perspective on kind of this estate sale in your lifetime. So Sue had shared that, and one of the unique experiences told the story of someone walking out with one of your guys' long-term possessions. And maybe do you mind sharing a bit about how therapeutic that was, how intimidating it might have been, but then how valuable it was for you guys as well?
Mhm. Yeah, so 2018, we were in the midst of a move. We built our dream house kind of thing, and we were moving into it. We were actually staying in the same neighborhood, but we had a very large house that was full of plastic stuff that we had bought for our kids, um, over the years, and it was all shoved down in a storage room, a very large storage room. And whenever we contemplated going down there to, clean it out, um, we would go in there, look at the size of the task, and run screaming back to the couch, right? Um, so we came up with the half-hour rule, and we would literally go down there daily. We would set a 30-minute timer on one of our iPhones, and we would work hard at it for 30 minutes. When the rule was, when the phone beeped, no matter what we were doing, we had to stop. And that was the only way we could get through that. And through that process, we had, I mean, so many old keepsakes, things people keep, like my sports jacket, my athletic jacket from high school with the letters, right? Um, couldn't really do it up, of course, at my age and stage of weight, but we could put it on. We could take a great set of pictures with it, and then we could release it, having the four piles of keep, donate, sell, and landfill kind of piles. It was helpful to organize that. But yeah, through that, we just kind of realized, oh my gosh, we spent so much money on stuff over the years that we just end up playing with briefly, and then it becomes landfill. And ultimately, if you think about your possessions, all of them will end in a landfill. And we've also been through with our parents too, things that they assumed that we would want, we find no value in. Even with our kids, my wife kept their, Barbies and stuff from them when they were little girls. And she would ask them, you guys want this stuff, or should we hang on to it? They're like, no, we don't need it. So what we assumed would have value to us in the future really didn't. So there were a lot of good learnings through that. Stuff is just stuff. And like you said, investing in experiences is such a much better way to use money. It just, the memories will last in your brain and in theirs, in different ways, but they'll be with you forever, and they'll bring value forever. So I think we learned a lot about just money management through that process too.
Yeah. And so we talk about this process of letting go, and whether that's professionally or with possessions. And here we are now in retirement. I'm just curious how you launched into retirement with so much confidence to say, I'm just ready to take on this freedom. And
Hmm.
here's a few of the core items that I'll definitely be doing more of in retirement. You mentioned travel, golfing, and
Hmm.
we'll tease out the podcast here as well, and obviously the financial piece as well. So, how did things change? We'll start from the bottom to the top here. How did things change financially when you got to retirement now? You've done this purge, you've got your dream home built, and you're ready to move on to the self-funded retirement. How did that change?
Yeah, so I was somewhat worried about that aspect of it. I'd read a bunch of articles about how, going from an accumulation mindset to a decumulation mindset can be very jarring. And so I had worried about that quite a bit. I found it wasn't as bad as I was anticipating. Um, the, in my financial software, I use a program called Banktivity on the Mac to track my finances. Um, I had a few reports laid out of my saving every year, where how much was I saving in the tax deferred, how much tax-free saving, how much taxable savings were there each year, and just realized, boy, those go to zero. So when you retire, right, it's a hard transition. You go from maxing out your accounts down to zero. And so that was very eye-opening, just that whole process. Um, and then just being sure you've got enough. I think
Yeah.
you don't want to retire with just barely enough to get by if inflation stays at 2.5% and if healthcare doesn't accumulate more than 4% per year and if you can get a Medicaid nursing home and whatever. Just make sure you've got enough. So overshoot a little. I guess I would say you don't want to work too long necessarily, but uh, and you don't want to get into the one more year syndrome where I'm just not sure. I got to do another year and, slog through it. You don't want to be there either. So I guess just be sure you've got enough. And we're very fortunate we were in that spot. So I think those are probably some thoughts about the transition to retirement from a financial standpoint. Um, yeah, and then just how are you going to actually generate cash flow, right? You've got these investments. Do you put aside money into fixed income where you're paid off and try to live off the interest, or do you just invest like you've always invested and just sell some of the principal when you need to? How do you approach that? Tax location of your investments is very important, and we're in the process now of doing series of Roth conversions. If you see it probably with many physicians, they build up most of their wealth in tax deferred um, accounts and ultimately face huge required minimum distributions when they get to whatever it is, 72 or 75 or somewhere in there. So we're in the process of trying to convert those down, and I guess that's another realization for me was just that because of the need to do Roth conversions in early retirement, you are still going to be in a reasonably high tax bracket, whether you want to be or not. You certainly could avoid it temporary. You could avoid the temporary pain of paying taxes only to get punished with RMDs when it comes time. So again, here we're now still paying moderate level of tax even in retirement when our income's gone to zero. So, or I guess it hasn't technically gone to zero, but you know what I'm
Earned
saying.
income. Yeah,
Your
earned income.
paycheck's gone to zero.
Yeah, and so real
So,
quick, just
I think you got to get prepared for that reality that you're actually still going to have to owe taxes to the government, even though you're not earning money directly.
yeah, and so for the average listener out there, maybe RMD is a foreign term. Maybe they haven't thought about that yet. And really, the story that we're telling here is with a lot of earned income saved to the traditional 401k, we've deferred taxes on those. And the IRS has these laws that say, hey, at 72, maybe 73 or 4 or 5, it's now phasing back. But you will be required to take out a percentage of the account.
Mhm.
And on a
Mhm.
$3 million account, even if that's 4%, that's $120,000.
Mhm.
Now, if you got 4 or 5, maybe $6 million, we're looking at $250,000 that the IRS will say you have to take out that first year, and that factor goes up. So every single
Yes.
year, it's a higher and higher percentage. And so while you could have been taking money out or doing these Roth conversions at 22 or 24%, you might be forced into the 32 or 35% federal tax bracket. You might see 3 to 5% additional at a state level. And all of a sudden,
Mhm.
you're paying 15 to 20% extra taxes that you could have paid through Roth conversions earlier in retirement or even closer to the end of a career by stacking your income on top of living within your means. And that's a really powerful tool. The Roth conversion is really one of the main talking points for evaluating tax efficiency in retirement. So I appreciate you bringing our attention to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's been, I would say, the dominating feature of our tax return these days. It's just going to be, converting a fair amount of that tax deferred money. You got to remember that tax deferred money continues to grow. And if the stock
Correct.
market returns 20% like it did last year, you're not even ending up lowering the balance, even if you do a fairly large Roth conversion. So you got to
Yep.
get on those Roth conversions fairly early. And we even did one in 2024 because Sue worked only 4 months and I worked only 8. Our income was relatively lower, so it was a not a low income year, but it was a relatively low income year. So we even started in 2024 with the Roth conversions, and I just did a big one here in January to get things rolling for the year.
Awesome. Awesome. And the main point here too, Darren, and one thing that you probably looked at, I've seen several physicians who say, I'm going to retire at 65 because that's when I get my free health insurance through Medicare. And realistically, between 63 and 65, there's a high probability with, again, north of, 3 to $5 million in a 401k, you could actually be working for a very diminished income because you're earning money that is going to go into these IRAs and be taxed at 40 to 45% across the board. And so
Hmm.
if we get caught working late with a high 401k balance, into our 60s and maybe even like you mentioned, a physician working till 70, those
Hmm.
dollars that you earn in the last part of your career between, 7.5% FICA tax, you could be looking at something of 50 to 60 or maybe even 70% taxation on dollars you're putting into your 401k. So
Right.
is that money really worth working for? Or could we evaluate going to a point eight, doing these Roth conversions and actually being net ahead on taxes? So that's one of the e-money planning tools that we use as well in these conversations. It's very in depth, right? This isn't a one
Hmm.
size fits all. But if you have a
Hmm.
high 401k balance and a high income towards the end of your career, retiring early may, to your point, only impact 30 to 40% of your take home pay when it's all said and done.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
looked at those
absolutely. I
numbers and
mean,
said this is our reality here.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, we modeled several different with our financial planning software that we use, and with the blessing of our CFP. We looked at several different scenarios of the incremental benefit of continuing to work, and it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
We reached a point where, gosh, we really do need to start converting some of this money to Roth, and well, that's all income. So if we continue with our mid six-figure salaries that physicians receive and the Roth conversions on top of that, you're in the 37% bracket and you're paying huge amounts of tax. And so you just don't need that work income at some point. And,
Yeah,
and
and
it,
that's
it
just at the
it's
federal
just
level, right? Yeah, on the
right.
state taxes of 5, 7. I mean, Minnesota, I believe, is up in the high nines, if not double digits at a state
Yep.
level.
Yep.
You're looking at 40 to 50, 60%.
Right.
That's a non-zero amount
Just
of
just ask
taxes.
yourself, do you really want to work at 50 cents on the dollar, or would you rather retire? And yeah. So you get
It's
to
it
that point.
it may
That's a
not
good
be,
spot to be in, right?
yeah,
You never want to complain about paying tax. If you pay tax, it means you made money.
yeah,
So paying tax is not a bad thing overall.
no.
But with our graduated tax system, there is the law of diminishing returns for sure. And so, take a look at that, and you might realize that retiring somewhat earlier than you had thought of could be in your interest.
Yeah, and the takeaway might be not just that you could retire, but maybe on paper, if you add up the emotional drawbacks of working late career and then the financial impacts of this 50 cents on the dollar piece, maybe not you could retire, but it sounds like you should retire ahead of 65. And that might go from just permission to encouragement to get out a little bit sooner.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. It doesn't suck.
well put. Well put. And so now, as we close out our conversation, Darren, I know that you're doing a phenomenal job staying busy. You've got the golf piece that we've talked about, but let's pick up on maybe if you don't mind telling us a little bit about the podcast and then your travels and how those are
Mhm.
really a major part of your guys' retirement.
Yeah, well, I'm kind of a ride along with the podcast. Now, Sue was approached through her coaching career, and she was found by a media company who contacted her to do a podcast. And they thought having me along as a to give a financial perspective on some of these topics around physician wellness and coaching and burnout and just coping with a physician career. And so we recorded 2 seasons of a podcast. It's called Meet the Toberts, and it's available. You can find it on your standard podcast apps. But we were very transparent in that podcast. We tried to take people through our journey in life. We talked about raising children and as a two physician couple and what that means and how uh, we would help each other cope with various aspects of the medical career. The financial piece was always interesting. We actually did a little side thing that was fun on travel hacking. So that's actually been a focus of mine. Credit card companies and airlines and hotels have loyalty programs that you can actually extract significant value from if you pay attention to the rules and follow the um, recommended steps for, enrolling in the programs and getting value out of them. The thing about those is that Congress has largely left them alone for now. So any income or value that you generate from loyalty programs like credit cards or hotels or airlines is tax-free value to you. So I'm always interested in tax-free income. So that's become a focus of mine, and it's really nothing more than reading on the computer and maybe tracking credit card bonuses and so on in a spreadsheet and just following things along. But I've I feel been able to get significant tax-free value from that hobby. And then, like you mentioned, yeah, I'm pretty big into golf, so that involves even some winter travel with golf. I've been down to Arizona since I retired to play golf, and going out to Hawaii to play golf at some point here. So a fair amount of planning involved with that. So actually, that takes time. And I've just, taken up again, just reading, having time to read. During my career, I would go to read, and I'd usually realize I was too tired to read because I'd read a couple pages and be, dozing off right away, not able to concentrate. So, improvements in sleep, improvements in wellness, health, diet, weight, strength training I'm doing. Now, these are all things that were relatively neglected when I was working. And I'll be straight honest with that. I did not take good care of my body. And I think that's a common story among physicians
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, I have not been at loose ends or bored for one single minute during my retirement so far. It's been go, go, go. And when there's nothing to go to, there's something to read, there's something to look into, there's new aspect of something to look into. So, or I can just go to the range and hit some balls, so there's, I would say, and I often worried a little bit because you read so many articles about having something to retire to. You've got to have something planned. Um, Other than, golf, travel hacking, um, traveling, and reading series of books that I've been putting off. I probably have 700 books on my Kindle that are half read.
Sure.
Just those are the things. And I just wanted to see what it was like. And I was not worried about getting bored. It turns out I was right. I've never been bored yet. It's still the first year, but so far not bored. So I would maybe go counter to the whole idea that you have to have something to retire to. I didn't have a whole lot But if you just, my wife and I sat down, we just said, what are some things that we would put on a list that we want to, check off a so-called bucket list? Well, when we got to 100 things, we said, okay, we don't need to go further because we're not going to be bored. We've got lots to do. So I don't know. I don't have a second career. I don't really have a side hustle. I don't really have anything that I need to work for. Um, so I guess I might be a little bit of a counterexample. I retired without a specific hardcore plan, but I was always thinking I'll make one if I'm bored, and I just haven't been bored. So.
Yeah, and I think that really ties back into the theme of really a lot of our first half of the conversation, where your identity really isn't engulfed by the career. You haven't adopted the healthcare's values, or use that role as a purpose necessarily. It's a means to an end. It's certainly
Mhm.
enjoyable, but you were able to repurpose that scientific curiosity and basically just redesign and reapply that exact same mindset to your retirement and say,
Mhm.
here's what my schedule is. I'm going to start taking my physical health, mental health, financial health very seriously. And
Mhm.
in doing so, really orchestrated a phenomenal retirement to retire to. So maybe it didn't feel quite so formal. Maybe you
Right,
didn't need
right.
to take it from zero to 100, but at the same time, certainly have plenty to retire to, whether it be the books, the travel, the hobbies, or the podcast. I mean, you've got a lot going on nonetheless.
We do indeed. Yeah. It's been a wild ride so far, and I don't see it slowing down. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, the last comment here, last question I always have, Darren, any advice for, I guess you took us through some advice for the younger physicians: save early, understand tax efficiency, allocation, try to understand exponential growth. But how about for those physicians that are maybe within 5 years of retirement? Um, any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, just like we hope that our patients will come to us for advice earlier in the process of a disease, right? Or even we hope that they'll come in and do wellness checks so we can catch problems early. By all means, get with a CFP earlier. I'm signing my girls up with our CFP, and they're in
Awesome.
their 20s. Okay. It's never too early to get on the right path, right? So that's what I would say if you're wanting to retire at any point, make a connection with a CFP, or um, at least use an online tool to begin planning out what retirement looks like from a financial perspective. And looking at those numbers again over time and periodically checking in is just the best way that you can to give yourself certainty that you'll be able to be okay in retirement. So that's the big one from a financial perspective. From a life perspective, I guess I would say, um, start to examine where your identity is. Who are you as a person? You need to be able to answer that question. If uh, you see yourself as a uh, person who is this, and the other thing. And by the way, I work as a doctor. That's kind of my approach to it. Um, I found that to be quite compatible with my personality. But there are others, like, start to think about, how do I transition to retirement? What does that look like? How does that affect me as an individual? Am I going to be okay with not having that practice there? So those are my little pieces of advice, I guess.
Yeah, that's perfect. You talked about the health, whether it's relational or mental, physical, and the wellness piece, right? Getting with the CFP. I laugh, I chuckle because, it might even be something as simple as the annual wellness exam, right? Just checking in once a year to just say, how am I doing? Still good? Great. And you get that
Right.
clean bill of health for 365 more days just to touch base and check in because, you know, you might have something that's just worth looking into a little bit. And you might
Right.
discover that maybe you not just could retire, but you should retire because that 50 cents on the dollar piece is a very real issue for folks that have, I don't want to say oversaved, but saved enough to create a
Mhm.
retirement income that's absolutely livable on. So
Yeah, yeah.
with that, Daren Tobert, thank you again for joining us here on the Health and Wellness Podcast.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Health and Wellness Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Michael Swartz, Certified Financial Planner and Master Certified Physician Development Coach. If you're looking for additional resources for integrated physician retirement planning, please visit healthandwellness.com. We'll see you in the next episode.